Moving on, it may not be very surprising that the system status quo makes me cry. However, when what really gets the tear ducts working is the fact that it's delivered in a twistedly, beautiful, powerfully, unapologetic, poetically pointed way, just dripping with raw emotion, you might wonder what the fuck I'm talking about. Well, as I like to say, instead of telling you, I'll just show you. Ladies and gentlemen, Matt Sedillo.
Here is a nation, packaged complete. Police escort skinheads and hooded Klansmen to march hate down public streets. Well, those very same police quote us to meet, cannon fire on black boys in hoodies and Mexican kids with shaved heads. They are killing our kids. While half the nation applauds in the homeland's defense, because they think that a white woman's purse has more value than a black or brown woman's life. Here is a nation hell-bent, 1%. Genocide pipeline from underfunded schools to overcrowded prisons. They knew Gingrich, our kids, ain't fit for nothing but a life in and out of the system, stripped of innocence, guilt by birth certificate students. Orders before children. Children. Suspects before students. Young girls. Whores before victims. Here's a nation that eats its young. This is not a democracy. This is not a republic. This is an open-air prison, an industrial-scale plantation. Anything and everything you've ever gotten from this system as a mathematical assessment, a calculated equation set to the algorithm of the cost of doing business. Keep your hands moving, stomach consuming, mind functioning within the narrow confines of your job description, blood-soaked country, forged in genocide, built on slavery by a den of thieves, posing as Messiah, the Constitution, Thomas Jefferson, Jefferson Davis, white Jesus, Western civilization, civilizing mission accomplished, manifest destiny, American exceptionals, peculiar institution, institutionalized racism, declaration to plantation, anthem to slave ship, the bicentennial, your back to the slave with the feet of Lady Liberty, the dirt poor, dead tired, huddle child, living from the popfield tenements of Ellis Island to Arizona's blood red coyote trails, the traffic in brown flesh, brick by brick, grave by grave, inch by inch, slave by slave. Here is a nation, there are its chains. Keep you in place, watchtower, overseer, agent killer, union bust, McCarthyism, Patriot Act, acting in interest of national defense. Which of you would stand against it? Which hunt who was so blown? Who said that? Who did that? Which side are you on? Here is the firing squad. They killed Metacomics, they killed Tecumseh, they killed Pieta, they killed John Brown, they killed that Turner, they killed the Rosenbergs, killed Sacco and Vanzetti, Malcolm X, and Martin Luther King, they killed Ruben Salazar, they killed Fred Hampton. They were to kill in much the same fashion. Here are the blood-soaked fields that claim the life of Andy Lopez, Virginia Flores, Susie Pena, Mike Brown, Natasha Orange, Trayvon Martin, half the nation applauded. Here is that nation. This is not a democracy. This is not a republic. This is the state of the union. They are killing our children. We are at war. And this is a call to arms.
And if that doesn't play your emotions like Ray Charles played the piano, then you have no soul, or at least no central nervous system. After Matt's poem, I had the opportunity to sit down with him and talk poetry, politics, and his own path to the spoken word stage. Take a look. We are here with Matt Sedillo at the Cielo Gallery and Studios in downtown Los Angeles, and he just performed, and I cried, and so now that that's over and I've composed myself, thank you so much for joining us, Matt. Your poetry is intense, amazing. It's every emotion in the human register at once. How did you get started doing poetry?
Well, I actually wanted to be a writer when I was like really young, and I wanted to be like novelist, but that takes a lot of time. And I was like 14 years old, and that was like kind of like not that didn't quite work out. And then so I had to work, and then in the process of working, I still had these dreams of artistic aspiration, but things kind of
went south in my life, and I ended up homeless, and I started all this political study. And after that, I became very serious about like I was going to be this political activist and put away the dreams of being a bourgeois artist. Is ridiculous, right? And so that was my idea, right? So I was going to start writing pamphlets and doing all stuff like that. And what ended up happening was my friend, we went to May Day March, and a friend of mine took me to a poetry reading afterwards. And I saw someone doing some political poetry. And I was like, okay, I can do that. And what ended up happening was I actually made a lot of friends, and I made a lot of connections, and I got to travel around a lot. I made some slam teams. I was in the LA Times. A couple other things happened. So more and more, I just kind of loosened up, and I also just realized that these things are interconnected, and that life is your life is your life, and you shouldn't like compartmentalize these things, and that your artistic passions and your drive to see a better world, or for me anyways, my artistic passions, the idea to see a better world, were not in contradiction with one another.
So I'm curious, you said that you became homeless and then you sort of became political. Were you political before that, or did your experience as someone who's homeless really define your activism and your political stature?
Well, what happened was, before that, I was actually, I don't want to say anti-political, but I was somewhat apolitical, and I was actually I kind of had this idea that I was going to make art, and that was like really this hard calling or something like that. Um, it was kind of ridiculous. And then what had happened was I ended up in a situation where, I was in my car, I was living in my car, and I didn't know how I was going to do, and it was just in Dallas, and so I ended up out there, and it's very hot out there, and so I spent my time in the library, and I started reading these books to figure out what had happened, because my whole life I've been told how smart I was, and then like, um, I just didn't understand like how I could end up in this position, and so then I started reading about economics and stuff like that, and so that eventually led me to reading Marx and all kinds of other stuff. So that made me really like, okay, I get it now. Like I'm part of this. I'm part of this larger things that exist outside of my whether or not I'm aware of them. I'm part of something bigger than myself, and I started to understand that. And once I got that, being I'm kind of obsessive by nature, so I got really obsessive. I started reading, and then that's kind of how that all played out, and that's how it became politicized.
And when you write your poetry, do you have a specific idea in mind, or do you just, is it something like you might be walking down the street and something hits you, you write a line, and then you build off of that? What's your workflow like?
Well, usually when I come up with a little concept, I'll have like a little phrase, and then all of a sudden I'll start hooking around that. But if you look at a lot of my poems, there's a lot of lists and stuff like that, because I'm like kind of a history nerd, so that makes it easy for me to like just be like and Arizona and Colorado and Texas, like just like so I oftentimes have these little flows, like these little killed Metacomet, killed Tecumseh, killed Kimuretta, killed John Brown, killed Nat Turner. So I had that for a long time, and that was actually part of a different poem. And then it was all of a sudden came up with the concept "Here Is a Nation," and then all of a sudden I had "Here Is a Nation," then it became part of "Here Is a Nation." It worked much better there. I got another poem called "The Devil," and that one has like war, famine, genocide, and the bottom line. Well, I had war, famine, genocide, and the bottom line for a long time, but it wasn't until "The Devil," the poem "The Devil," that it made a lot of sense to put that right there. It's not until I have a point or some kind of real something to really hang it on that these lines become more than just lines. They become more than the sum of their parts.
Interesting. And I'm also curious because art obviously has this tremendous ability to reach people on an emotional level as opposed to, just trying to convince someone of a political fact or something. You're going to run into a lot of pushback just sort of naturally, but art obviously has the ability to reach into people's emotions first and then thereby convincing them of sort of a logical fact or something like that. So I'm curious, particularly with your poetry that is incredibly emotional, but it's also so rich in information. How have people responded both positively and negatively to your work?
Well, I mean, positively, it's been fantastic. I mean, people come up to me afterwards and they say, like they say all kinds of wonderful things, and I don't really. It's weird to even talk about, like someone says, "Oh, you're so inspirational." And I was like, like that's kind of weird, but that happens. But it's much more fun to talk about the negative experiences, because those are so I'm much more comfortable with. I'm much more comfortable being confrontational than I am accepting a compliment. So I've had a number of negative responses and people like getting all mad. The funniest one I remember was I was at a party in Venice, and I had this poem called "I Remember the Alamo," you know, and it was basically I remember the Alamo, but I remember it differently, and I try to recontextualize the Alamo as like this anti-colonial thing. And so I'm doing this poem. This guy's screaming, "How do you know? Were you there? Were you there?" And finally I was like, "Yeah, I was, 1846, and I stabbed Davy Crockett. If you don't shut the I'm gonna stab you too. This one guy one time, he was during a poem I have called "History of My Family," which was about basically coming from a long line of people that had a lot of drinking problems, and like kind of like me coming to sobriety, and this idea that I had these two journeys, this idea of a library card versus the bottle, right? And I had to eventually choose one. I'd eventually choose one. Was going to be like this, raging alcoholic, or was I going to be this kind of person that was going to try and be an agent of change in the world? And which I'm not telling everyone they need to stop drinking, but I needed to stop because I was like driving my car into trees and stuff. So I was doing that poem, and it talks about like how much anger I had towards things, how much anger I had towards people in general, how much anger I had to the people that I could actually see, as opposed to like these like forces that were really ruining my life, which were things that none of us ever see, and these kind of conditions we're born into, which really only really benefit tiny few percentage of the population globally. And so it's a poem about coming to that consciousness. And this guy in the background is screaming, "Proud to be an American, proud to be an American." So I kind of did the poem directed at him. What I did not know is he was yelling, "Go back to Mexico" before that. I did not hear that part, which point the poem would have stopped. Yeah. There'd have been a much more, there'd been a different a different response than me just pointing at him and directing the poem at him. And I remember this guy afterwards, after a show, asked me like, or I did a Q&A afterwards, and he's all like, "What's it like to walk through life so angry?" And I looked at him, was like, "What's it like to walk through life so passive aggressively? Like, did you see my show?" Like I think I had a date with somebody that day. Like, it was like the second or third day or something. And they came in, and I like waved at them and embarrassed them in front of all the people. And there wasn't another one after that. But anyways, but the whole point I'm trying to make is that I try to make the show a fun environment. And this guy would ask me, "What's it like to walk through life so angry?" just because of the political content. I'm like, I'm not angry. You probably walk through life angry. You can ask me a question like that.
What are your next travels? What are your next stops?
My next stops are, I got the Anza coming up, which is in the Bay. Booking a lot of other colleges. I think I might be going to Allegheny. I think I got something in Minnesota. So there's a few different places across the country I'm looking forward towards booking. I'm really excited about that, and I'm keep it going. I mean, every year it seems to be like kind of upward and onward. A little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more, which is good. It takes a minute to adjust to sometimes. Sometimes that's difficult. When you're doing something for a while, you become very accustomed to being able to do certain things at a certain level, and then all of a sudden, new opportunities come, and you get very nervous, and you get very feeling inadequate, or feeling like you don't really belong there. Which is I think natural for many artists. And as a working artist, oftentimes people ask me questions like that, and oftentimes people ask me questions like, how do you progress and how do you move forward? And I have to tell them, like, well, first of all, what are your goals, and do you believe you deserve to achieve them? Because if you don't, then you're going to self-sabotage. And so, and I tell it to people, but it's something I struggle with myself.
Awesomely enough, Matt was also one of the performers in our creative activism event here in LA a couple of weeks ago. Combining visual art, poetry, comedy, and music, we put on a fucking fantastic show at a brilliant underground gallery in the Boyle Heights neighborhood of Los Angeles called Facha Patoto. As I mentioned, Matt Sedillo was there to poetically weave a fuck you to the powers that be. Also in that medium was spoken word poet and musician Joey Flores. We had activist comedian Lee Camp, plus my band Rooftop Revolutionaries did an acoustic set. Top that off with a gallery covered in art curated by Art with Teeth, including pieces by Anthony Freda, Abby Martin, Hal Hefner, C.S. Stanley, and more. Take a look at some of the images from the event, and please, please, please feel free to take this idea and create your own. I guarantee it's one hell of a awesome and inspiring time.